Hey, everyone, and welcome back to the Journeyman Podcast. We are back with episode 29, and today we're going to be doing a deep dive into the current political landscape.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Specifically,
Sounds fascinating.
the U.S.-China trade war, which has taken some pretty dramatic turns, as I'm sure you're all aware of.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you want to take a look at the source material that we are using today, we'll have that linked in the show notes below.
For sure.
I would also highly recommend that you check out the Economic Shift channel on YouTube.
Yeah, great channel.
Yeah, for more great content on this topic. But first, let's just unpack what's been happening with our expert today.
Right, sounds good.
You know, this trade war, it's not just about the numbers.
Right.
It's reshaping global power dynamics in ways that I think we're only just beginning to understand.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. It's a really fascinating case study, I think, in how quickly global power can shift.
Absolutely.
You know, we often think about the world in terms of these established alliances and these predictable trade patterns.
Right.
But the U.S.-China trade war really reveals just how fluid those relationships can be.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It wasn't that long ago when the U.S. and China were like the power couple of the global economy, you know, just racking up billions in trade, everything from your everyday consumer goods to like high-tech components.
Yeah, their bilateral trade actually peaked in 2022 at a staggering $690 billion.
Wow.
China kind of became the world's manufacturing hub at that point, and American companies were just so eager to tap into that massive Chinese consumer market.
I mean, it seemed like an unstoppable partnership.
It did.
But then, like a lot of high-profile relationships, you know,
Sure.
things got messy.
Yeah, a little bit complicated in 2018.
Yeah.
The Trump administration imposed these tariffs on Chinese imports.
Right.
And they cited concerns about trade deficits and intellectual property theft as reasons.
Okay.
China naturally retaliated with their own tariffs.
Right.
And so that's when this trade war really took off.
Yeah, it's been a classic tit-for-tat escalation ever since.
For sure.
Each side just trying to inflict more economic pain on the other.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that the impact hasn't been evenly distributed.
Right. By 2024, total trade between the U.S. and China had plummeted to $582 billion.
Wow.
So that's a drop of over $100 billion from its peak.
Yeah.
While both sides felt the impact, obviously the U.S. only lost about $1 billion in exports,
Okay.
whereas China's losses were much greater, with their exports to the U.S. dropping by about $100 billion.
Wow.
Dollars.
That kind of loss has to have ripple effects. I mean, it's not just about the money. It's about this shift in global power dynamics.
Absolutely. China recognized very quickly that it couldn't rely so heavily on the U.S. market anymore.
Right.
So they've been actively diversifying their trade partners, seeking out these new markets and suppliers.
Yeah.
A prime example of this is in the agricultural sector.
Okay. Yeah, China used to be a huge importer of American soybeans,
Yeah.
you know, a major market for U.S. farmers. What's the situation now?
Yeah, so they've actually shifted their focus quite a bit to Brazil.
Wow. Back in 2016, Brazil only accounted for about 46% of China's soybean imports.
Okay.
But by 2024, that number had surged to 74%.
That's a big jump.
It is.
And that's got to have a significant impact on American farmers who were, you know, really relying on that Chinese market.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been great for Brazil, but
Right.
you know, it does beg the question, like, what does this mean for their environmental policies?
Yeah.
Is this increased demand for soybeans going to lead to even further deforestation in the Amazon?
It's a good question, and something that a lot of environmental groups are definitely keeping an eye on.
Absolutely.
The environmental impact of China shifting trade alliances is complex,
Very complex.
with far-reaching consequences. And it's not just limited to soybeans either.
No, it's not. China has also been very strategically securing energy deals with countries like Russia and Qatar,
Interesting.
you know, to reduce their reliance on the U.S.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket anymore. What kind of deals are we talking about? Yeah, so for example, they signed a 30-year natural gas agreement with Russia, which ensures a steady supply of natural gas through what's called the Power of Siberia pipeline.
Okay.
They've also got a $60 billion liquefied natural gas deal with Qatar.
Wow.
And these deals really demonstrate that China is committed to securing its energy needs independently of the United States.
It seems like China is very actively creating its own sphere of influence, but you know, this trade war, it hasn't just been about resources in traditional markets.
Right.
You know, it's also fueled a tech race, especially in the, you know, crucial semiconductor industry.
Absolutely. The U.S. has been attempting to restrict China's access to these advanced chips in hopes of slowing down their technological advancement.
Right.
But China has actually responded by investing billions of dollars in developing their own domestic chip manufacturing capabilities.
So it's a high-stakes game of technological catch-up.
Yeah.
With both sides vying for control over technologies that will define the future.
I think that's a really good way of putting it. The U.S. has been trying to maintain its technological edge,
right,
while China is very, very rapidly developing its capabilities.
Yeah.
And I think this competition really lies at the heart of the trade war.
Absolutely.
And it has global implications.
While China is busy building these new alliances and pushing its technological advancement, is the U.S. just sitting back and watching all of this happen?
Well, not exactly. They've been focusing on strengthening their own alliances, particularly with India, as a way to counter China's growing influence.
Okay.
President Trump met with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi in early 2025 just to kind of solidify these ties in defense trade and technology.
So it sounds like the U.S. is trying to build its own power block to counter China's.
Yeah.
And the stakes are pretty high. I mean,
yeah.
the control over these key technologies, access to resources, and the ability to project military power are all in play.
Yeah.
This is getting pretty intense.
It is. The U.S. has even offered to sell India these advanced F-35 fighter jets, which, is really a signal of their commitment to strengthening this partnership.
Those jets are like some of the most advanced military aircraft in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a clear message that the U.S. is serious about deepening its relationship with India as a way to, counterbalance China's growing power.
Yeah.
And of course, they've also been promoting the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, or the Quad.
The Quad.
Which is a strategic partnership between the U.S., India, Japan, and Australia. So it's like the U.S. is assembling their own little squad to kind of counter China's moves.
Yeah, it's like a complex geopolitical chess game.
It is.
With high stakes and, no clear winners yet.
Yeah.
So it really raises the question, is the U.S.-China trade war signaling the end of globalization as we know it?
That is a great question, and one that we'll definitely delve into further, but we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Don't go anywhere, and remember to like and subscribe to the Journeyman podcast for more deep dives into the topics that are shaping our world.
It's not just reshaping economic alliances, though.
Right. It's having a profound impact, I think, on the global balance of power.
Yeah.
Countries are being forced to reassess their allegiances.
Absolutely.
And kind of choose sides.
It's like the world is dividing into these two camps,
Yeah.
With China aligning itself with Russia and Brazil and Qatar, while the U.S. is, strengthening ties with India and Japan and Australia.
Right.
It's a real-life geopolitical chess match playing out in front of us. But
it is.
How does all this power struggle? How does it affect everyday people?
Well, the impact is multifaceted.
Okay.
This shift in manufacturing away from China,
yeah,
it could lead to higher prices for consumer goods that were once produced there.
Right.
We've already seen this with certain products. And it really highlights how interconnected these global supply chains are.
Right.
And how fragile they can be.
That's a great point. We saw this with the global chip shortage a few years ago.
Exactly.
And the trade war has only added to that instability.
Right.
And let's not forget the impact on jobs, too.
Yeah.
As companies move manufacturing to other countries, it could lead to job losses here in the U.S.
Exactly. This is a particularly sensitive issue in regions that are heavily reliant on manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
The trade war isn't just this abstract economic concept.
Right.
It has real consequences for people's livelihoods and for the global economy's stability.
It's a stark reminder that behind all the economic data and the political rhetoric,
right,
there are real people whose lives are being directly affected by all of this.
Absolutely.
Are there any stories that particularly illustrate the human cost of this conflict?
Well, one of the most compelling ones, I think, is that of American farmers.
Yeah.
The loss of the Chinese market for soybeans has been absolutely devastating for many, particularly in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Some have been forced to declare bankruptcy, while others are, just struggling to make ends meet.
It's heartbreaking to see these hardworking people, whose livelihoods are just completely upended by this trade war that they have, absolutely no control over.
Yeah.
It really brings home the human impact of all these global shifts.
It does.
So as these new alliances kind of solidify and the trade war continues, what does the future hold? I mean, is there any hope of the U.S. and China kind of patching things up?
It's tough to say.
Yeah.
The relationship has been significantly strained.
Right.
And there's a lot of mistrust on both sides.
Okay.
Even if a trade agreement were reached, it's unlikely that things would go back to the way they were before the trade war began.
It seems like we're entering a new era of global trade and geopolitics.
Yeah.
One that's more fragmented and a lot more unpredictable.
Yeah, it does appear that way. This makes it really crucial, I think, for individuals to stay informed and understand how these developments might impact them.
Absolutely.
Knowledge is power.
For sure.
Especially in such a volatile landscape like this.
Absolutely. And speaking of knowledge, for those wanting a deeper understanding of these global economic trends, I highly recommend checking out the Economic Shift channel on YouTube.
Great channel.
Yeah, they break down these complex topics in a very accessible and engaging way. You can find a link to that in our show notes.
I agree. Economic Shift is an excellent resource.
Yeah.
It's crucial to explore these different viewpoints and stay curious about the world around us.
That's what we aim for here at the Journeyman Podcast, helping you navigate this complex world by providing these insights and diverse perspectives.
Yeah, it's about connecting the dots, understanding the bigger picture, and seeing how all these seemingly disparate events are actually interconnected.
It's like piecing together a giant puzzle.
It is.
With each piece of information bringing us closer to understanding the forces that are shaping our world.
For sure.
And speaking of understanding, let's kind of shift gears a little bit and explore a question that kind of emerged from our discussion.
Okay.
Is this the end of globalization as we know it?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Globalization, as we've known it, has been characterized by this interconnectedness, this interdependence, and the relatively free flow of goods and services and capital.
Right.
But the U.S.-China trade war, along with other geopolitical events, really seems to be challenging that model.
So are we witnessing a decline of globalization, or is it simply evolving into something new?
Well, there's no easy answer.
Right.
Some argue that we're seeing a retreat from globalization, with countries turning inward and prioritizing their own national interests over global cooperation.
Yeah.
This is evident in the rise of these protectionist policies,
right?
The reshoring of manufacturing, and the growing emphasis on these regional trade blocs.
It seems like there's a growing sense of economic nationalism.
Yeah.
With countries wanting to be more self-reliant.
Right.
And less dependent on these global supply chains that have proven to be, quite vulnerable during times of crisis.
Precisely. The COVID-19 pandemic really exposed the fragility of these complex global networks.
Right.
And fueled calls for greater economic sovereignty.
Yeah.
Countries are now looking to secure their own supply chains, particularly for essential goods like medical supplies, food and energy.
So while globalization might not be disappearing entirely, it's certainly undergoing a transformation.
I think that's a good way of putting it.
But what are the potential consequences of this shift?
Well, one concern is that a retreat from globalization could lead to slower economic growth.
Right.
Globalization has facilitated international trade and investment and innovation.
Yeah.
And it's driven global prosperity for decades.
Right.
And so a decline in globalization could really stifle these engines of growth.
It's true that globalization has lifted millions of people out of poverty.
It has.
But it's also created economic inequalities and environmental challenges. So perhaps this shift is an opportunity to kind of reevaluate the benefits and drawbacks of globalization and maybe create a more equitable and sustainable model.
That's a crucial point.
Yeah.
As we move forward, we really need to consider what kind of globalization we want.
Right.
Should it be solely focused on economic growth?
Right.
Or should it also prioritize social justice, environmental sustainability, and human well-being?
These are complex questions with no easy answers.
They are.
But it's clear that the U.S.-China trade war and the shifting global landscape are really forcing us to confront these questions head on.
Absolutely. It's a critical juncture in history.
Yeah.
And the choices we make now will have profound implications for the future.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Exploring the U.S.-China trade war and this potential decline of globalization as we know it. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought-provoking question.
Okay, I'm all ears.
If this trend towards a more fragmented and nationalistic world continues, what will the global landscape look like in 10 years? Will we see a world divided into these distinct economic and political blocks, or will new forms of cooperation kind of emerge, driven by the need to address these shared global challenges like climate change and pandemics?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that I think we'll be grappling with for years to come.
It's a future full of possibilities, both exciting and daunting.
Yeah, and it's crucial that we stay informed, engaged, and, continue learning as we navigate these uncharted waters.
Yeah, it certainly is a fascinating time to be alive, that's for sure.
It is.
The more we learn about these global shifts,
Yeah.
the more we realize just how much is at stake.
Right. It's crucial to remember that we're not just passive observers in this unfolding drama.
Right.
The choices we make both individually and collectively will shape the future.
That's an empowering thought. It means we actually have agency even amidst all these massive global forces.
Exactly. And one of the most powerful ways to exercise that agency, I think, is by staying informed.
Yeah.
Engaging in thoughtful discussions like we're doing here. And advocating for the world we want to see.
Well said. And that's precisely what we aim to do here at the Journeyman Podcast.
Yeah.
We want to equip you with the knowledge and the perspectives to navigate this complex world and hopefully make more informed decisions.
It's been a pleasure delving into these intricate issues with you today.
Yeah, me too.
The U.S.-China trade war and this potential restructuring of globalization are topics that deserve ongoing attention and analysis.
I couldn't agree more. And a huge thank you to our expert for joining us today and sharing these incredible insights and expertise.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine.
It's always enlightening to have these conversations.
It is your thoughtful questions and your genuine curiosity make these discussions all the more engaging.
Oh, you're too kind. But seriously, folks, if you enjoyed this deep dive and you want to stay ahead of the curve on global events and trends, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the Journeyman Podcast.
Yeah.
We've got more fascinating deep dives coming your way.
And for those who want to delve even deeper into the economic side of things, I highly recommend checking out the Economic Shift channel on YouTube.
Yeah, great channel.
They offer in-depth analysis and insights on these global economic trends that are shaping our world. You can find the link to that in the show notes.
Absolutely. Economic Shift is a fantastic resource. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brain cells firing. This is the Journeyman Podcast signing off.